So just a brief, because I don't know if everybody knows anything about who I am, but I mean, as Caitlin said, I'm an artist, educator and curator. I work across all of those fields, though I kind of sort of see them as all part of my practice. I look at them as a kind of collective whole, and each one feeds into the other. I'm also, much more recently, though it once was a quite dirty word, but I'm actually kind of thinking about the role of a community artist, because I did actually start off a lot of my work working as a community artist, but so much more of my work now tends to be within community or within certain communities. So it's something that I'm willing to explore and sort of investigate. All my work is informed by diversity, cultural identity, and what it is to live in a multicultural society today. Mainly because, I suppose, because of my own identity, but also I think living in sort of London, growing up in the sort of 70s and 80s and 90s, you kind of, there's a lot of experiences that kind of happen, and there's a lot of things that I want to question within my work, and there's lots of things that I want to think about in terms of kind of coherent society. I would have thought, could we possibly build it? Maybe it might be a little bit utopian, but I think those are some of those things that I'm thinking about. I'm particularly interested in place, identity, migration and community in my work. I've learnt that very, very recently, to be able to kind of succinctly say that that was the thing. So, as Caitlin so excellently put it, my work does involve, I would say, collaboration, participation, dialogue, and I think more recently an engaged way of thinking about perhaps the translation between art and change and social change. So I've been thinking a lot about art's role within a kind of social, much more sort of bigger social world, which is kind of beyond me and beyond a kind of art world. So one hopes one might actually be able to affect change with some of the artwork. So today I'm going to present you some of these works within these ideas, and also I've been, so I suppose in the last year I've been thinking about, and I didn't think about it until this summer, I suppose a way or a kind of manifesto for my practice, I would say. I didn't think of it as a manifesto until recently, when I was working with the Bar House and Barbican, and one of the things that we were doing was writing manifestos. So I suppose it's a kind of writing, I suppose, a bullet point of what it is that you actually want to do with your practice. And it's still very, very loose, and I think it's at the beginning of a kind of, it's in the sort of beginning stages of a kind of proposal or a way of looking at the way that one works with people. So I'm just going to start with a little quote. A number of recent, this is from Umberto Eco's The Open Work. A number of recent pieces of instrumental music are linked by a common feature: the considerable autonomy left to the individual performer in the way he chooses to play the work. Thus, he is not merely free to interpret the composer's instructions following his own Thus, he is not merely free to interpret the composer's instructions following his own discretion, which in fact happens in traditional music, but he must impose his own judgment on the form of the piece, as well as when he decides how long to hold a note and in what order to group those sounds. All of this amounts to an act of improvised creation. And I think that quite a while ago, when I first was starting to curate, I was asked to write a proposal, which was for 198 Contemporary Arts Learning, where I do a lot of work with them now. And I wanted to propose a very kind of open jam session type of curating. So where I would sort of invite lots of, I'd almost have like a lab basically. Invite lots of people from the community, activists, yoga teachers, musicians, filmmakers, young people, older people, politicians, electricians, anyone into the space. And I think in some ways I have sort of injected that. I'm not going to talk about my curatorial practice, but certainly through things like inviting meditators to come into a space, or inviting eco-activists, or and this is something that I've been thinking about. Well, I decided to do that in the space. How am I doing that within my own practice? So I'm going to just show you a few slides from, this is from July, earlier this year, Art School Lab. And this was a really great way for me to really think about my practice, because I was invited to be a kind of, I wouldn't call it like a tutor, but a kind of facilitator, guide to a number of really prolific artists. Actually, I was quite awed by these people that I was working with, but you know, any of them could have taken this lab, but you know, I was kind of honoured to be one of the people. And I suppose I was trying to think of a way to think about what I did and the practice, and how to get these people to actually have an experiential experience of my practice. So what I did with them was I went back to my old performance, because I used to do a bit of performance work when I was a bit younger, and sort of brought out some of this sort of performance exercises. So this exercise was initially a kind of exercise in feeling space, feeling each other, getting connected with each other. So essentially everybody was put into this circle, and you're lucky because you're going to get to know how it all works before you actually, because they didn't get to know how it all worked. They just had to comply with me. And so I invited them all to get into this circle and basically walk at equidistant from each other. So they had to keep in that space, and then make it faster, and then make it really fast, and then make it really, really fast. But they had to keep that equal distance. And then I'd slowed them down, and then slowed them down some more. And then after they've got really slow, I'd ask them to continue to walk, but with their eyes closed, so they could actually feel a sense of the space. But they had to keep in the circle. Obviously, you know what happened next, didn't you? They didn't keep in the circle. But I kept on reminding them through this process that they had to keep walking in a circle, and then open their eyes. And then I got them to open their eyes, and they noticed that they were in all these various different places, which was really quite fun and exciting and scary, and for some people quite unnerving. But then, of course, you have to take these to another level. So I took them to the next level, again, starting with the circle. And this time, after they closed their eyes, they were allowed to actually go off and just explore the space with their eyes closed. So then they were, the instruction after they were exploring the space with their eyes closed was to actually see if they could find people to start to form relationships with. So there's Martha. Martha at the corner is actually trying to stop somebody from bashing the chair into the chairs, actually, because and I love this, because this is, I don't know if anyone knows, this guy's Peter. Peter started, he was in the Yehudi Menuhin school, so he was like the principal, and he started the creative learning at the Barbican, the kind of education department in the Barbican, like in the 80s. So it's really nice to have him kind of also be involved in this piece. So, about the photo so much. But so they were asked to kind of see if they could meet somebody in the space and form relationships. And then to see how many people they could actually get to join their relationship, to develop their ideas with, to see if they could get somebody to sort of perform with, or kind of do something with, or somebody to kind of, you know, sort of propose an idea if they would come along with them. So they went along and sort of collected in groups, and some people could get like big groups together, and some people could only deal with being on their own, and some people could like only deal with being with one person. And then I also asked them to see how close that they could get together, how intimate, how much of themselves were they willing to give to somebody with their eyes closed. Of course, again, different things happened where some people were really kind of receptive and open and able to give very intimate, like Petra and Isaac here were very able to kind of be really intimate, and some people were very, very scared of that. And then sort of after that, I did give them a bit of a rest because it was a bit, and then try to get them to also actually get back into a sense of themselves. And so did a bit of kind of mindfulness and just got them to all sort of get back into themselves and into what it was that they wanted to come to this workshop for, and what was their practice, what was the thing that they were interested in. And then for the rest of the day, I sent them out then, after they've had these engagements with each other, after we had a discussion about what had happened in the morning and how they sort of discussed that they'd made relationships with people and then gone off and had to, and how some people had actually, when they were asked to kind of make a relationship with one person in the dark in this, and then I told them that they had to let go of that person, how sad they felt, how difficult they found that to leave behind, or how easy they found that to leave behind, or how difficult they might find it to relate to somebody else and people that they rejected. And even though they were amongst a group of people that they had been working with for a couple of days and got very friendly with, they still were rejecting people because they were in a very different kind of zone. And then I sent them out to go out and have an engagement. And they were just really simple things that I just sent them out. So they had an afternoon of just going around the Barbican, trying to do something, basically, to just have some form of engagement with people, just for them to sort of instigate that. And one person did actually start a bit of a revolution. And she posted it up on the web, and I was like, whoa, that's a bit kind of, but she was quite, it's interesting how people were put into a position, and she was quite antagonistic and defensive. And she did start a big argument, which was really quite interesting. And she recorded it without the person knowing. So again, that brought up an interesting thing about ethics. One person went out and was like, I really can't do this. This is really bad. Started to look for homeless people, and actually found a friend of hers who was missing. And he was actually also looking for a homeless person, which was really, really unusual. Somebody ended up in a rehearsal she was Brazilian, and ended up in a Gilberto Gil rehearsal just through talking to somebody out in the foyer, and he ended up saying, oh, why don't you come along and see this? Because he was a musician. You know, it was incredible. Some people decided that they weren't going to talk to anybody, and people came and talked to them. So what I was trying to get with this, to sort of do with this, is to try and think about how we open ourselves up to possibilities within a kind of engaged relational practice. I'm just going to go on. So, yes, of course you can. Okay, so the people in the group. So if I give you a little bit more context to the Art School Lab, that was, Barbican had a exhibition of the Bauhaus on this summer. And they've also been working with a very interesting piece of, I think, I was very critical of. Paul Hamlin funded kind of idea that proposal, which is basically that they give you money to increase the work, basically the working capacity of artists so that they can go and work in participatory settings. They were trying to do something quite different with it, basically. But actually, at the end of the day, the role, the tick boxing was still about, let's go and get them to work in hospitals, let's get them to work in schools. Are they able to do this? And are they able to do that? Which was what essentially that they wanted. But they were trying to do something different. So jumping off from the principles of the Bauhaus, I don't know, I mean, do you all know that Bauhaus were really kind of, they wanted to think about social change, they wanted to think about how artists can affect community, and really wanted to sort of basically wanted to change the world at a really particular time, which was quite horrible, because that's why Bauhaus is not, well, it's still there, but it's like a museum to this kind of thing. And so we were asked to, so everybody that was involved were artists or producers in their own right in some ways, and they were cross-disciplinary, writers, playwrights, musicians, artists, theatre, they were all, but they were all wanting to sort of, and that's why I said that they all could have led in their own way, and some of them will lead, because they're doing 3 years of this and they're still involved, and some of that group will lead the next group in the next art school lab, and I think it's something, if you're interested in it, you should look out for, because I think it's a really interesting programme. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you sent them out into the street,
yeah,
with all those little tasks,
yeah,
what was your aim with that?
Basically, I wanted to sort of translate what I do, and I'm going to go on and say how I work, or how I'm thinking about working, because my work is collaborative and participatory, and it really relies on relationships, and I wanted them to think about how they might make work with other people. So those exercises, although they were very sensory exercises, I wanted to kind of isolate those things that we take for granted every day. We have a conversation with somebody, and actually that sparks another idea, but you don't necessarily relate that to the fact that that's becoming part of your work. Do you know what I mean? You had that conversation, you sat in the pub, you bumped into somebody at the bus stop, or, they absolutely fueled your practice. So I wanted them to get a real sense of what that was. And I suppose in the context of the bigger picture of the idea of what the the brief was from the Barbican, as in terms of artists and social change, I wanted them to become really acutely aware of that, and of their role within a kind of engaged process, or as participants in a bigger picture. And I mean I will go on to it a bit more, but I actually think that participation, I've been kind of questioning in my practice the idea of participation as being quite a kind of a possibly political with a small p act, because I think a lot of people do not participate in things for various different reasons, or they don't feel able to, or they don't feel that they have anything to say. So I do like to, I'm considering now how that is a kind of an act or an action that people could do. So I wanted to make them aware of that.
You ask them to consider their actions.
Well, we did consider them in the sort of briefing at the end of it. Then, when people sort of told the stories of what it was that they'd done, or what it was that they'd experienced when they'd gone out and had that kind of, had this experience, or whether even there's people that reject that experience and say, I'm not going to. You've asked me. I'm rebelling against that. Why are you doing that? Well, what is the what's the rebellion about? So one woman decided to leave, and she went home, and then she came back the next day. She goes, I wish I didn't. in fact, you know, she lives in Brighton. Well, she lived in Brighton. She moved to London when she finished that. But she said, I wish I didn't. She came and got the train, and she said, I went to Brighton, and then she said, I really wish I didn't, because there would have been a real challenge to me to actually really think about engaging with other people. She's a musician, and she's quite a kind of gets in the studio and, you know, she's right down, and she was like, well, but I want to affect change, and if I want to affect change, I can't have a relationship with myself.
She came back, that was result.
Yeah, she came back, and exactly, and that was a good result. So even that resistance, to me, I think is a kind of interesting thing. So I mean, as I was gonna say, I mean, my interest is in, you know, in the unexpected, in the mistake, in the disruption, in the kind of upset, but also in the reunion, in the engagement, the you know, the joys, all those different things that kind of come about through having a proposal of some kind sort of given to you. So yeah, shall I go on to the and so in January this year, I presented this project in Peckham Space, and I'm going to show you a picture of Peckham Space because I think it's a really interesting building. It's not very clear at the bottom, but Peckham Space, I don't know if anybody knows Peckham in London. Well, oh, you know Peckham, don't you, Norma? Peckham, you probably know about it in its notoriety more than its kind of, you know, it's the place where Damilola Taylor lived, and so the North Peckham estate is just a little way along. In fact, the square was probably tidied up after Damilola Taylor got killed, and they just realised that they needed to make this sort of urban space a bit more kind of, a bit nicer for people to live in, and this was a response as well. Peckham Space came out of a response from the ex-dean of Camberwell School of Art, who was like, well, we need to be much more kind of working with our communities as well. So over a period of time, conversations with the council and everything, Peckham Space was developed as an art space that also engaged with the community. So it was really about a kind of a sort of socially engaged kind of art practice. And it's, you know, I mean, that's like a, you know, mock-up drawing, but it's, you know, you can imagine right out here, you've got your drunks that sort of sit on the square, and over there is the library right behind Peckham Square, so you get lots of people who are going in there. There's also the, the information centre for the council, so you get lots of people that have got benefit problems or whatever. They're all, so it's a really sort of buzzing square. You've got kids on the square messing about with bikes. You've got people who just sit there and it's, you know, all the community sort of go there. So Peckham Space invited me to, and this is one of their sort of family days. So they just spill out on the street and start doing stuff. Actually, one of the projects that they've just recently done, which is really interesting, was a post-riot project. Was Peckham was the place. It was that after the riots in August 2011, people started putting post-it notes on the hoardings of all the shops that were around, and they sort of were talking about what they felt about their area. And subsequently, that has been turned into, by Peckham Space, a Peckham Peace Wall. So across the road, across the square from there, they've got a wall, which is where people can continue. They've got all the post-it notes, and where people can continue to talk about what they want to see in their area. So it's quite an interesting project. So that was the place that I was invited to work in, and I'm just going to. And so what my proposal was to continue to do some work. I've been doing some work around music and thinking about the influence of, in particular, black music on multicultural society, and how people engage in it. how people own it, and how people the sort of different relationships. And I kind of been exploring it for a few different ways. One of these ways is through this this choir, which is actually led by a gospel singer that I brought in, but she's singing funk, and I quite like the idea of the kind of, there are lots of parallels between funk and gospel. I don't know how many people are really aware of certain funk bands like Parliament or Funkadelic, and you know, the vocal harmonies, the ways that they put their music together is just reminiscent of gospel, and so it translates really quite easily. And she was extremely shocked when I said to her, basically, what you're going to do is you're going to sing funk, and but subsequently she got really into it, and has created her own choir out of that. But she got really excited by this possibility. And then I also, I'm going to rush through these because I want to move on. Decided to explore the music of kind of, that had I suppose shaped a kind of community, and given them a sense of place, and enabled them to sort of be here. So I worked with an elders group, and I worked with music with them, and asked them to, through music, to sort of talk about their history and their position within Britain, within the UK, and how the music had actually, you know, how they felt that had shaped them. We did a lot of performance work again. The performance that we did, it was quite significant, was at Clapham Common Bandstand. I don't know if anyone knows the sort of history of the Caribbean communities coming here, but in 1948, when Windrush, the ex-soldiers came back on Windrush, the first place that they stayed when they got off at Tilbury was in the bunkers in Clapham Common. So it was quite significant for us to be able to somehow get Clapham Bandstand, and they presented this afternoon of music, just like a sort of Sunday afternoon that people would have had in their homes, just because they were like isolated. So on Sunday afternoons, people would gather around to sort of the music systems, and they would listen to music and share stories and kind of let go of the days that were the difficulties that they had. And I thought a really good way to do it, because I've been trying to think beyond the story, and it was to actually for people to sort of embody it somehow. So I made it into karaoke DVD. So each of those, you can still get these at Studio Voltaire, but basically that each song is enabled. It's kind of created in a way that you can sing their stories, basically, and the images are created are images that I've collected from them, and they've been made into little karaoke films. There is a blog spot, and I could send that so you can have a look at that work. And then I went on to Britain, travelled around to Bristol, and did a project about the first black music club in Bristol, which was actually opened by Tony Bullimore. Really nice story that Tony was like an Essex boy that used to drive carpets around, you know, these people that used to kind of sell carpets out of their white vans. And I think they did it up until the sort of early 80s, you could get a carpet out of a white van. And he knocked on the door in Swindon and found and saw this sort of beautiful West Indian woman, answered this door, and he said, I want to marry her. And the way that he just kept from going up and bothering her, and then decided that he was going to impress her by opening a nightclub for the West Indian community. And yeah, it was very serious. I mean, they're still married. It's just such a... She does the garden now, and he sits inside and, like, you know, watches TV. And but he opened this nightclub, which was the first. I mean, and Bristol has had a lot of problems with the West Indian community integrating. And it was around the time of the bus strike. So he actually created. So it's like taking that Sunday space that I was talking about, and into a kind of much more kind of open social space. He created this nightclub, and this club was notorious, of course, because it's a nightclub and things happen at nightclubs, but also launched a lot of careers. So like in '74, Bob Marley played that. You know, it's really kind of interesting. So for this work, I, as well as using the interviews and responding to the interviews, I brought together a group of people, like 70 people, who used to go to this nightclub. And part of the piece was actually an event that brought them together and collected their stories while we were actually filming this work. So, you know, so I had to provide, to do the whole, I don't do things small. So, you know, it was like menus and seating plans and discos and all of that kind of stuff. And then the stories were kind of translated through reenactments by all these young people from Bristol who embodied all the stories in them. And I made it quite free, so I actually just gave them little snippets of stories so that they could interpret them in the way that they felt it might have happened. It really was interesting because then they actually also considered that their grandparents might have actually been cool at one point, because I think before that they didn't actually think, you know, that they were that cool, but they were like, wow, they were cool. They wore cool clothes. They did cool things. They, you know, they actually had a life. Because I think a lot of the thing that you sort of is translated, I suppose, it was translated to all of us as well, is this thing about, oh, it was really hard. Oh, it's really kind of, and this was translating something quite different to them. So when Peckham Space asked me to do to propose something, and they said, well, we've got a group of young people to work with you. Actually, I just thought, have you got a speaker at all? Otherwise, I could just play it on the computer. But anyway, I'll just carry on and do this. But what I did was I thought, well, all these things that I've been making, and what is the next thing that I could possibly make? What is the next thing that I could make with these young people that would still keep this thread going? We talked, these young people, and we talked a lot, and they, you know, talked about MP3s and MP3s. And they all brought out their MP3 players, and I said, oh, where's that? You know, I just downloaded it, it was free, you know, it's like all this stuff. So I decided that we were going to make a record. And using this record, well, we decided together, actually, we were going to make a record because I didn't even know what a record really looked like. And we thought it might be quite a nice idea to make a record. And that record, ironically, we recorded that record digitally. The sound piece was made up of, I sent them home to actually talk to their parents about the music that they would felt that would pass on to them, and something that they might pass on to another. So a kind of version of inheritance tracks for all of us oldies that listen to Radio 4. And I played them Goldie's inheritance tracks because that was kind of the way that I thought that they might have a way in, sort of a drum and bass person could actually do this as well. So, and let's get these. Do you think that they might work? Or, if they don't work, then I can always send the. We have got a plug here.
Goldie's done a lot of work with disadvantaged people in Bristol.
Yeah.
So
because.
Really in with that group, he knows what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. Along with all the sort of Ronnie Size and all of those people that have, because I met a few of them when I was in there. that worked with these young in Bristol. Well, they were some of them were part of a theatre group, and some of them had just put a call out, because I quite like this thing of not actually having a group, so to speak, to work with. And they just sort of said, would you, you know, and they just were asked to turn up, and then they just turned, and they actually did turn up. I think the real difference between working in Bristol and sort of working in London is oversaturation, because if I did put that out in London and said, you know, come along and do this, you could sit there and there'd be no one, and you've got, but this time you actually got loads of young people that were actually just like, oh, this sounds cool, I'm just going to turn up. They didn't have much more than that, but it sounded cool, and they turned up at 9:30 in the morning, and you know, and they were very keen to sort of be involved. So that was really quite exciting. And then they were phoning friends. Oh, this is really cool, come along. And so you'd get someone else that turned up at like 12, and someone who turned up at 4, and you're like, you've only got one scene that you can get involved in. But yeah, it was quite exciting, the difference in... I had already had a conversation with the DOP about the kinds of scenes that I'd talked to people, the elders about, the kinds of things that went on in the club. So I sort of set a parameter of like, well, they had music, so they had a live element, and then they had, a dance floor, they had dominoes going on, they had, people talked about their love affairs that happened, and so I'd have these kind of very loose scenes of different places coming into the club, having a little kind of tete-a-tete and seeing whether two would... In fact, you know what was really funny? The two people that said, oh yes, I will volunteer for the love affair, ended up actually going out with each other. They met themselves. That was really incredible. They met and they just ended up going out for... It didn't last very long, but they did. So it was probably not dissimilar to some of the things that happened. So I just sort of say, well, this is the sort of thing that happened at the club. And then we'd give them an opportunity to sort of just embody it and just sort of play with that, play some music and get them to sort of dance, play the music, the kind of music that they listened to. So it would be a ska track, although it wasn't on the film, but we played the kind of music that they listened to at that time that was selected by the elders group. And then they were just like, well, how do you dance to this? And then they just kind of felt it. So it's actually a whole lot different to what they would have actually done. And I think that's quite interesting because dancing is so different, but they interpreted it, and I wanted them to have a loose way of interpreting.
Did you find that there was a kind of like a cultural gap between the street culture of the 50s and 60s, like the pop musical and culinary and all that stuff that was going on in those areas? And after sort of the gangster culture came in from the hip-hop thing from the States in the 80s and 90s, there's a cultural gap where they're not in touch with that massive street culture.
I think just a recent thing a recent project that I'm going to talk about as well is we just showed a film at Take called Lovers Rock, and I think that as any teenagers, like as basically, if you think about sort of post-war for British young people, the 1960s was like, right, okay, we reject everything that our parents have have done. We're going to do it differently. That, if you think this community came over, so they were literally born in the 1960s and early 70s. So in the 1980s, they rejected their parents. So when this sort of lovers rock music kind of came about, they sort of rejected. They were like, we don't want to do anything. So there is this sort of gap between. So those people's children then have a different kind of. They're the young people that have probably grown up in hip hop culture and whatever. So there is the gap there, and then. I think this group and the groups of young people that I've worked with subsequently are kind of a bit more interested, but they don't know the journeys back or don't understand it. They're looking for a kind of way. So they're a bit more interested in what went on. How did we get here? What is the story of it? What did we do? You know, and I think they need it in some ways. There was a gap, but the bodily movements, the translation of stories is so it hasn't been done in this way, and I think the community hasn't necessarily had that. Those communities haven't necessarily had those vehicles before. So you know, I'm gonna just kind of move on to the legacy tune. So this is our record, and hopefully it will play.
The song that I'm going to give you today is called BarbyAsante.
So that place, that piece, so we made 1,000. We got 1,000 records pressed, basically, and those records became the opportunity for us to have another further exchange. So those 1,000 records became the first item in South London Black Music Archive, because they're in Peckham, it's South London, and so basically I wanted to create an opportunity for people to further all those stories that I've been collecting, to open it up to the diverse people who all have connections and engagements with black music in different ways, to think about where the young people are at and how they're making a kind of hybrid, syncretic kind of music that is, infusing all kinds of influences that they have, and to sort of think about where they're at. So I created this kind of archive, open archive. So all of the archive invites you to listen, share, and contribute. So you're invited to kind of bring things to the archive that maps a story of black music in South London. And if you want to see it, you can, or want to contribute to it, it's actually on at Tate Modern at the moment, until the 25th of November, only at weekends. So if you are in London and fancy kind of popping in, it's on. So there was active archiving, a branding, we're to brand it, and an archiving structure with lots of administration, which I passed on to myself and 2 gallery assistants, making sure that everything sort of fit. So we worked together to make sure that everything kind of looked as though it might be an archive. And then on the back wall as well, we've got a map of South London that was created through various different conversations with, not just with the young people, but also with a wider amount, loads of people that we could ask about different places in South London. So each place, I don't know if I've got the map next, this is archiving, so this is someone archiving, these are some of the items in the archive that were donated, including beautiful, this is an artist called Rita Keegan that made 2 dolls, Jimi Hendrix over in the corner and Amy Winehouse 27 Club, various different people and organisations like the Black Cultural Archives as well donated material. Young people, so that's a grimy DVD about grime in Peckham. This is somebody's record list. This is a list of records somebody made back in the 80s and listed. When she was a young person, she listed all of her records. Punk next to pop, next to the Jacksons, next to the Cars, so that was a really nice piece, and she'd kept that. So it also gave the young people a sort of thing of like, wow, look, this is something. More items. Other people kind of who were involved in projects. This was a project that was in Peckham that lost its funding, which was a music project, and Steve Barb came along and wanted to archive that and to kind of make sure that it was remembered in some way. We had listening stations. This is the map. Okay, the map, all of these places that make the stations up on the map are different places and spaces in and around South London. So each place was represented by a place, a music venue, a street corner, whatever. And then we had sort of, again, trying to have these kind of conversations with young people. We have this machine which you can send a text message to, which will print out your story on these little receipts that we're adding to the map. So the map is becoming much more sort of layered. And I've actually just started talking to somebody about open sourcing and the possibility of making the map into a kind of interactive online thing as well. So that would be interesting. So there's the map with the different places on. Places like Peckham and Brixton, and also we tried to represent pirate radio stations, because the young people talked a lot about how important the pirate radio stations are to them. And then going back to my kind of proposal and my practice and what I was trying to sort of decipher with my practice, this thing of open archive. Is it really open? The idea of allowing people to sort of give me their stuff. And also, I don't actually keep things unless somebody says to me, you can keep it. So what I do is make a contract with people whereby they loan it to the archive. And what the work actually is the traces of the collection. So it's all the administration. And at the moment, I'm having conversations with various archives as to how does this constitute an archive, and where can I deposit it afterwards? So I'm still having kind of those conversations. It's still processed. So as these are manifesting into exhibitions, it's also continuing. I see the exhibitions as not as exhibitions, but more as project rooms, so to speak, where it's still actually an ongoing conversation, and each person that comes in asks, lots of people propose, well, why don't you give it to the Museum of London? Do you give it to the local museum? And everybody's sort of putting their little piece in about the contested space of these memories. But what was really nice about being at Peckham Space, it being on Peckham Square, was this opportunity to just do things really spontaneously. So, we had a party. Someone decided to come in they decided that they quite liked it, and they said, can we DJ? And we were like, well, I don't see why not. So we ended up spilling out onto the square and kind of inviting people from the square into the gallery. In fact, that is the director that's having a little hug with and this gentleman here, he's got an MBE, and he's just a guy. He hangs out on the square. He walks around Peckham Rye. He also, when they had the rioting, he basically saved lots of shops, because when there was fires, and this is why he's got his MBE, there were little fires going on, kids, and he would run in and put the fires out, and that's why he's got his MBE, because, and they gave him a ticket to go back to Jamaica, I don't know what I think about that, but he didn't have a passport, so he couldn't go. So, but I thought that was really interesting. This lady, I love this lady. This lady, she's a single mum. She lives across the road, and she heard music. And it was the day, I don't know if anybody else is a single mum like I was, basically it's the day that dad takes the kids, so you've got free time. And usually you sort of, that first day, from personal experience, that sort of thing, is that you leave, the kids leave and you sort of go, and you go, it's a bit quiet, and you put EastEnders on, but you're not really interested in that, and it's sort of lost a bit. And she heard music and she decided to come out, and so she just came out, and it was like, wow, this is the first time I've partied for a really long time, and it was across the road from where she was living. Lots of other people coming and having a good time. So I'm going to sort of move on to this sort of manifesto idea of my work. So with the open idea, I just wanted to sort of think about what happened there. Basically, we responded to this kind of thing that someone said. I proposed something open. So if that was open, then obviously it would be really nice to respond to that person's, and it's not something you can so readily do within a kind of art context, is to actually, someone comes in and says, actually, see all those pictures there, I'd quite like to intervene on those, or I'd quite like to do something around it. It's not something that we're readily able to do, but I think it's something that people more and more would like to consider. So as this project has gone to Tate, I think the conversation started to open up more, because Tate Tate Modern is a very different kind of space, and I think that they would like to think that they were very open and responsive to communities, but this was going to be a challenge, and I knew it was going to be a challenge because the gallery's actually set back right at the back of Tate, in where Peckham space was very open. I have to direct you. I have to tell you. It's like down by the cloakroom in the education bits. It's right at the back of Tate. And you have to sort of direct traffic to it, and you have to do a lot of publicity for it, and you have to kind of get a lot of buzz around it. So I didn't join Twitter before, but I'm on Twitter now, and I have to sort of tweet about it and photograph things that are coming in, and just to encourage people to I have to use this sort of social media to encourage people to come. But then on the other side of it, as an artist, you have to consider, as people will say, well, the kudos of the fact that you're showing this at Tate. And Tate, also to question Tate about their own, questions about their own openness and their own responsiveness, and we're having a lot of dialogues around that. So hopefully at the end of my conversations, and if you can respond as well to these ideas, I might actually be able to write something about what that is, or what that possibility is, because I think galleries are increasingly, and arts organisations are increasingly being asked to kind of work with communities. And how is that? There's programming for 2 years ahead, or there is opening the doors and allowing them in and kind of saying, what would you like to do? So this is something that we're kind of exploring. And I was involved in a debate with after the riots in August, with a theatre director and Baroness Lola Young, who works for Boris, basically, so the Mayor of London, as a kind of arts consultant. And basically she posed a question. It was an online debate called The Argument Room, as to what is the position of the arts in relation to social justice, and does an artist have a responsibility to the public, and if it does, what is it? And does contemporary art make a contribution to social justice, or is it just a pleasing illusion? If it does, can we measure those effects? How can we measure them? Are they qualitative? Can we just measure them with numbers? can we, and what is their outcome? And it was a really interesting conversation because she was asking what are artists doing to sort of respond to some of the really difficult social situations we're finding ourselves in now. What are artists doing about the banking crisis? What are artists doing about the war in Iraq? What are they doing? There is work around, but how does it affect? How does the artist's work affect any change, or how does it document even? How do artists document these current things that are going on? I mean, we could look at all kinds of artists, because I actually see myself, although I'm a visual artist, I work very interdisciplinarily, and I always have conversations with filmmakers, with theatre directors, radio writers. So because Lola's position is about, I suppose, the arts generally within the London Assembly, she was asking it of all artists. So what kind of, because also I think the difference is when we also spoke to another, there was also another woman who was involved in, I think she's a tricycle theatre, and they did, I think it was probably not even 2 months later after, they did a verbatim play which was called The Riots. Now, that is a very quick turnaround to produce a piece of work and to actually have that around. And usually what happens with all of us as artists, writers, whatever, is it's like it's like a churning, and then I don't know, sort of maybe the earliest you might get something out is a year, but you're probably looking at like 10 years before we've responded to anything that was kind of, so there's it's just like, and on one level we need to process that, but on another level there might be an urgency that we're not necessarily. So that was her question. That was her kind of question, and we debated this possibility. I mean, I was brought in because basically I got together with an artist, so again, I worked as interdisciplinary and tried to have conversations with lots of different people, with a designer, with some business people in Brixton, and gosh, there was an illustrator, there was a musician, there were a couple of DJs, a whole bunch of people, and we decided we wanted to do something that was about Brixton, and I was already involved in doing loads of work, so what we did was we landed, this is like the mock-up of, this is Windrush Square, this is the main square in Brixton, so like Peckham Square, it's a kind of new square that's supposed to sort of, it's really underused. So unlike Peckham Square, again, it's got the library and a cinema. Unlike Peckham Square, where everybody sort of, they kicked all their drunks off of this square and they keep it very policed. They try to make it, then it's supposed to be able to have a kind of events license on it, but they've got one plug sort of socket that kind of comes out. So, I mean, basically, you can't really do very much on it, because if apart from getting generators, and I tell you, HSS are rubbish for coming with generators. They didn't turn up on a day. So we just sort of put this proposal to the council, actually, that we would land this We Love Brixton sculpture on the street, on the square. And they actually said yes. And what was really interesting about it, I haven't got loads of photos of it now, was it landed, and during the day, again, and it was that buzz that kind of goes off in social media. Oh my God, there's this thing that's just landed, and people looking over the buses. They actually also let go, and we didn't have any security. They didn't send any police. The police actually, they had words with the police, and the police didn't actually come onto the square, which was really interesting. And they just let it happen. And this is really big, this sculpture. And if you imagine, people were climbing all over it, and kids were using it as stepping stones, and it's really tall. So I mean, there was moments when as being a curator and person who's done a lot of kind of public events, I was like, oh my God, what if they fall? We're in trouble. Who's got public liability insurance? It's only me, I bet. But they were using it as stepping stones. They decorated it. They destroyed it. But we had one really weird intervention. Was this guy came along, graffiti artist, and he painted this iconic image of a rioter. And this was a really interesting opportunity for people to have a debate, and they just had this kind of debate around themselves